dreaming of better fortunes and seeing their families. Tonight, the stories of migrants on the road from Mexico to the United States. Along a dangerous route stretching 1,600 miles, we encounter a 14-year-old boy alone on the road, trying desperately to reach his mother.
The best thing she said today is for me to turn myself in, and she will ask her lawyers over there to see what they can do. There is no other route for me. There is no other route because I'm traveling alone.
Joining him, migrants from all over the world, attracted to the American dream, but all knowing that getting in could be about to become even harder.
I need to get there before the election because I don't know the next president what will do.
We'll consider how the next US president might handle migration into America. And I'll speak live to David Miliband of the International Rescue Committee. Also ahead, an anxious wait for England. Their place in the knockout stage isn't sealed just yet after drawing 1-1 with Denmark. Plus, the actor Donald Sutherland, who starred in MASH and The Hunger Games, has died at the age of 88. Also tonight, more than 1,000 Hajj pilgrims have died in sweltering 51-degree heat in Saudi Arabia. We'll ask how it could happen. Acting like a band of barbarians, the Philippines hits out at China's Coast Guard, accusing them of causing a high-speed crash at sea. And the latest from Tenerife on the search for missing British teenager Jay Slater. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. Few issues get more politicized in the United States than migration. Talk of border wars and deportations have long been a rallying cry of Donald Trump's. He often paints those arriving from Mexico as rapists and gang members from Central and South America. But is that true? Well, it's not the picture our chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey saw on a recent trip through Mexico. Instead, large numbers of families, young men and women from China, Egypt, Jordan and Somalia, just to name a few countries. The effort to cross the border from Mexico has become multinational. But the bigger question is, has it become unmanageable? Since President Joe Biden took office, 6.3 million people have tried to cross illegally. That dwarfs the numbers seen during Donald Trump's time in the Oval Office. Now, both presidential nominees have pledged stricter controls, while in Mexico, authorities have started clamping down. Earlier this week, we showed you how one Mexican migrant was detained and literally branded. There's little empathy for a group of people desperate to make it to America despite the dangers. Among them, 14-year-old Edgar. Sky News found him alone on the road trying to reach his mother in Washington. How a child became stranded in the middle of this migrant crisis should cause alarm on Capitol Hill. But what are politicians there and in Mexico doing to fix it? Tonight, I try to get some answers from the former Foreign Secretary turned charity boss, David Miliband. Well, migrants from across the world pass through Guatemala and Mexico on their way to the US. On foot, they head to the main city in southern Mexico, Tapachula. From there, the usual route is towards Mexico City before heading towards the border with the US. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, reports from Tapachula.
Another migrant caravan in southern Mexico heading north to the United States border by foot. It's 1,600 miles away. It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming. They're from all over the world these days, whole families from the very young to the old, continuing a grueling journey that's already covered thousands of miles and multiple countries. A journey fraught with danger, which is why these strangers stick together. Myra has breast cancer. She's left Venezuela with her 2 sons. She wants to get to her family in the United States, so she's prepared to risk everything.
Porque no hay educación, porque no hay medicina.
Because there is no education, because there's no medicine. Because I'm an oncology patient. I can't get treatment in the public health system for breast cancer. And well, I need to go somewhere where I can get checked and continue treatment.
pues chequearme y continuar con tratamiento.
The migrants are met by immigration officials at a checkpoint and told they'll be taken north to the first major city in southern Mexico called Tapachula. And they're loaded onto minivans. This doesn't mean, however, that a journey further north is going to happen anytime soon. Crowds surge around immigration staff at another checkpoint. This one is in Tapachula. They wave their papers as the lucky few are led through. Often the answer is a resolute no. All they're trying to do is get on a bus north, but the Mexican authorities' assumed assistance has dried up. America doesn't want them in the north, and nor, it seems, does Mexico. So they're in a limbo. Well, there's 12 immigration checkpoints in the state. Hundreds of people gather. They're just trying to get through to be allowed to get on a bus to get further north. These people think they stand a chance today, and they're waiting for their names to be called forward. But it's the same everywhere we go. Migrants staying out of the sun if they can. It is boiling, boiling hot. They know they don't stand any chance today, so they're going to be sitting here for a few days. It's not just here. Look at this. It goes all the way up the street. Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States. What we saw at multiple checkpoints is what is developing into a multinational mess. Groups of young Chinese men and women take shelter amongst Jordanians, Egyptians, Somalis, even two friends from Kazakhstan. The list of nationalities is remarkable, not least because of the distances they've travelled. Saeed is a 28-year-old Afghan who worked for a British NGO until the Taliban arrived in Kabul. They'd already killed his father and two uncles. He's with his wife and three children, and his 74-year-old grandfather who has Alzheimer's. They've been on the move for 2 years. Do you think you'll make it to the United States?
I believe in God. I know I'm in Mexico, and most 90% of the people are arriving there. Actually, before the election. I need to get there before the election, because I don't know the next president what will do and what is he thinking about the refugees like us.
Amongst the migrants, we came across 14-year-old Edgar. He's completely on his own. He's travelled from Venezuela to Colombia, where his grandmother died. Now he's trying to get to his mother, who is in Washington, D.C. We arranged for him to speak to her on the phone. It's a heartbreaking conversation, and they both cried. The day before, he explained to her that he'd been kidnapped by a gang. He was only released after handing over $75, scrabbled together by fellow travellers.
It's dangerous to go out. In the public transport buses, they can kidnap us again. They can ask for more money. So the best thing she said today is for me to turn myself in, and she will ask her lawyers over there to see what they can do. There is no other route for me. There is no other route because I'm traveling alone. That's why I can't get through.
We spoke to his mum, and she asked us to take him to the authorities. She said it was too dangerous for him to continue alone. Edgar bade an emotional goodbye to his new travelling family. He's safe now, but when he'll see his mother, nobody can say. The migrants are in a sort of vortex, not being stopped from travelling north, but not being allowed to either. The day after leaving Myra's group as they boarded the immigration buses, we travelled south again. Remarkably, we found some of her group exactly where they had started. They had the paperwork to go north, but were taken back south by the authorities and dumped. Did the authorities acknowledge by taking you all the way back, it doesn't help you?
They are delaying us. Yes, they know, of course. But as I was saying, they are the law here. Here, we are nobody. So they do as they please with the immigrants. Right? That's the truth.
Local buses don't usually pick up migrants, but with fresh travel papers, they were able to flag a minibus down. In a square in Tapachula where the migrants congregate, they were reunited with friends and family. They, like all these people, refuse to accept defeat. But their mammoth journeys are far from over. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Tapachula, southern Mexico.
Stuart Ramsey there on a migration crisis in Mexico that's become multinational. But what can be done to avoid situations like Edgar's and make migrants safer across the world? Well, earlier I spoke to the president of the International Rescue Committee, David Miliband.
There are twice as many people on the run from conflict and disaster as 10 years ago. So 120 million people, 1 in every 65 people on the planet, 1.5% of the global population. If it was a country, it would be almost twice the size of the UK. And these are people, the majority of whom are internally displaced in their own countries, but over 40 million are refugees and asylum seekers beyond their own country. It's worth saying the majority of these people are in neighboring countries to those in conflict. So people from South Sudan are in the main people from Sudan are in the main in South Sudan, they're in Chad. But I think what's coming through very clearly about this World Refugee Day is quite what a global issue this is now. It's not just that people from Latin America are trying to get to America or people from North Africa are trying to get to Europe. You've got a genuinely global set of routes, some of which are being played by very unscrupulous gangs, and some of that you've been covering. But in all cases, there's a lot of desperation. And my reflection is that we need, as a global community, as national governments, as local governments, to do a much better job at managing the movement of people, separating out those who do have legitimate fear of going back home and do need protection, and those who don't. That's something that I think we do know how to do if we get the political and policy backing to do it.
But the point is, David, and you know better than anyone, that that political will isn't necessarily there. Not just that, these issues become incredibly politicized in the United States, in Europe, here in the UK.
Yeah, that's a good point. But in the face of that politicization, I think there's a very simple question. Is the problem to be addressed, or is it to be exploited? That's the issue. And as the leader of an NGO, I don't just sit here issuing points of principle. We have our own examples of what works. We know from the German experience that you referenced in 2015-16 that delayed assessment of asylum claims is bad for host countries and bad for asylum seekers. We know that the failure to integrate people is bad for host communities and bad for asylum seekers. We know that simply putting up more walls makes it more likely that the people who win are the people's smugglers. So I think it's incumbent on us, me as someone who's not in politics, to explain what we do know about this global problem and how it can be addressed in a sustainable and serious way. I don't think we can give up on the idea that there's an expert witness role to be played by those who do have experience of what it takes to manage this in an effective way. Because sure as night follows day, we know the following to be true. If you ignore the problem, it'll get worse.
Yeah, and I guess the next question then is, if we know all of these things, why hasn't anything changed? In fact, as you say, the numbers continue to rise. I mean, you know, the numbers right now are astronomical, 120 million people on the move.
Well, we know, I think, some of the causes of that. I've been addressing the question of how you tackle symptoms. Now, the causes are much longer term and much tougher. I mean, you've covered, I think, on Sky, the Sudan issue. Sudan has 1.5 million refugees who fled, 9 million people internally displaced in a brutal war that's sponsored by countries from outside Sudan. It's not just militias inside Sudan, it's sponsored by people, by countries outside Sudan. There's been a breakdown of diplomatic process. You know yourself the range of other conflicts, Ukraine, Gaza, etc. So there's a crisis of diplomacy that's the originating source of these people on the move. But then there's a set of requirements for how this is managed in the neighboring states, on the routes that are used, and what's the responsibility of rich countries. I was in Germany just this week. One thing's very striking. If you both refuse to take people in and you reduce international aid and you fail to create legal routes where people are able to establish their claim, then you are going to end up in a vicious circle. And I don't think that serves anyone.
No, and what we're seeing, as you say, I mean, if you think back to 2015, 2016, back then it was the Syrians and the Afghans that were on the move. And as you say, today it's more the Sudanese, for example. And certainly I saw many Sudanese in Calais just over the last couple of days trying to cross the channel. Each year, you know, as these other conflicts are not resolved and that continues to balloon in terms of the number of people moving, other conflicts are added to the list of people who are, you know, internally displaced and also leaving their home countries.
Yeah, you're right. I think this is a critical thing, that just because there are new wars in the headlines doesn't mean the old wars have gone away. You referenced Syria. There are still 6 million Syrians outside their own country, never mind the people who are internally displaced. And that's why I think one has to be honest that there is a management job of managing the problem that is separate from a solution job. The management job is something that the humanitarian sector, the sector that I work in, can really help with. Media coverage of solutions as well as problems is part of that. There's a wider politics that is obviously much harder to resolve. We're seeing that in Ukraine, we're seeing that in Gaza, we're seeing that in Sudan. But that's the nature of the world that we're living in. I make no apology for the fact that we, as a humanitarian NGO, we're treating the symptoms. We're not able to get to the roots of the causes. As I always say to people, you can use the humanitarian sector to staunch the dying, but it takes politics to stop the killing. And that's where I think we have to recognize the limits of our own power, but also the responsibilities of those in politics.
And as you know, I mean, this issue, and we've touched on it a little bit, of immigration is often used and politicized by those running for office at different times. And we can see that actually here in Europe with the European elections, far-right groups using the idea of immigration being a threat, a frightening thing for countries, as a way of almost, you know, being able to gain power again. We're certainly seeing it and hearing about it in the United States as well.
Well, I'm glad you raised that, because I think this is really important. I just want to pick up on the word that you used. One thing I've learned in the last 20 or 30 years is that when issues of immigration get confused or mixed up with issues of refugees and asylum seekers, it's bad for everyone. You see that in the United States at the moment, where they haven't had a coherent new piece of immigration legislation since 1986. So it's nearly 40 years since they had immigration legislation. The issues of immigration are to do with what a country wants, its economic, its social determinants. Japan has a very different immigration policy and approach than the United States. Issues of refugees and asylum seekers, where there are people on the run from danger, have legal aspects that are different from the immigration story. What I'm sure about is that unless you have a coherent approach to immigration and a coherent approach to refugees and asylum seekers, you'll solve neither of them. And that's something that I think is important to point out.
And David, I guess I have to ask the question, I know you often get asked this question, would you consider returning to politics?
Well, we're in the middle of an election campaign, and I'm not a candidate in the election campaign. So you've got pretty clear evidence of the answer. I've got my own responsibilities. I've got to be careful not to use IRC platforms to make political pronouncements or to cross the line between charitable work and political work. You know my own political affiliations, and in my personal life.
And I guess that's why I ask.
That.
I mean, if Keir Starmer were to get back into number 10, is that something that you would even consider?
Well, I'm not going to answer that on an IRC platform, because there are appropriate rules about what charities and charity leaders speak about and what they don't speak about. So I'm here to give whatever learning I've got from the experts that we have working for the International Rescue Committee in the field, and that's what I'm going to stick to with a rather British straight bat, if that's okay.
David Miliband speaking to me a little earlier there. Now, the acclaimed Canadian actor Donald Sutherland has died at the age of 88 following a long illness. Having made his name in films like The Dirty Dozen and MASH, he more recently starred in the Hunger Games franchise. His acting son, Kiefer Sutherland, was amongst the first to pay tribute. Well, let's go straight to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who joins me now. And James, what an acting career and what a beautiful tribute from his son.
It was, yeah. Kiefer Sutherland, himself a famous actor, announced the news that his father had died in Miami, aged 88, after a lengthy illness. Donald Sutherland was a well-known face, spanning 60 years of acting on the small screen and large. He actually had connections to the United Kingdom in the early days of his career, having graduated from the University of Toronto in the 50s. He attended the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, and at that period played a number of roles in the West End stage and on British television. But as you touched on, Yalda, it was in subsequent years, following a move to LA, that he embraced stardom proper, starring in Kelly's Heroes, the film, The Dirty Dozen. That was his first big break in 1967. And of course, he appeared in MASH as well. And thereafter, his acting talent and his looks lent themselves to roles to come. That lived-in face, those eyes that carried authority and danger in equal measure. He starred in Don't Look Now, the popular smash hit British horror movie of the early 70s. Starred alongside Jane Fonda in Clute, for which she won an Academy Award. And, was generally one of the foremost actors of his generation, certainly, and throughout a career that lasted 6 decades. His son, Kiefer Sutherland, as I say, announced the news and paid tribute to his father. I'll read it to you, Yalda. It says this: "With a heavy heart, I tell you that my father, Donald Sutherland, has passed away. I personally think one of the most important actors in the history of film. Never daunted by a role, good, bad, or ugly. He loved what he did and did what he loved. And one can never ask for more than that. A life well lived." A life well lived indeed, and a life and a career very much appreciated.
Yeah, as you say, a career that spanned 6 decades. But James, he never was able to receive some of those bigger acting awards, could he? I mean, I know he got an honorary Oscar at some point.
Yes, indeed, he got an honorary Oscar for his achievement on the silver screen. An acknowledgement that many would have regarded as coming late in the day, possibly too late. And as I say, he starred alongside the likes of Jane Fonda in Clute, for which she won an Academy Award. And the argument will continue far beyond his passing as to whether or not he was deserving of a greater honour. I think his son Kiefer touches on the lack of reward, perhaps, in his tweet when he talks about one of the most important actors in the history of film. Certainly, he had his fans in the household, and he did, Yalda, have his fans and supporters across the board, not just amongst audiences, but in terms of his co-stars. Dame Helen Mirren has been among those paying early tributes. She today has called him one of the smartest actors that she ever worked with, who combined, she says, a great intelligence with a deep sensitivity.
Yeah, really lovely tributes coming in. James, thank you so much. Now, tens of thousands of England fans arrived in Frankfurt today, hoping to see their side collect the victory that would guarantee them a place in the knockout rounds of Euro 2024. Instead, they were held to a draw by a determined Denmark side, as our sports correspondent Rob Harris now reports.
This match day began with so much excitement and expectation for the three lions in Frankfurt. And for this clash of European monarchies, the Prince of Wales was in the stands with Denmark's king. It was England, though, that had the look of football royalty. A confident start crowned with a goal from Harry Kane, sending beer flying in the air back home. But soon they were drowning their sorrows. We've seen this before with England losing leads. Too sluggish, too sloppy, and too much space for Morten Hjulmand for this stunning strike. Denmark were level at the break. England had lost control. Power from Phil Foden, but denied by the post. Then a rare bold call by Gareth Southgate. Captain Kane off in a triple change with more than 20 minutes to go. An injection of energy, and only Watkins immediately stretched the defence. But a winner couldn't be conjured. They just protected a 1-1 draw, leaving to some boos from fans.
We know the level has to be higher. We know the level can be higher. Maybe the biggest thing is we have to accept the environment that we're in and the expectations that are around us. And we're going to have to walk towards that challenge. At the moment, we're falling a little bit short of that.
So boring, sideways, just no attacking intent. Disappointing.
Terrible. It's lackluster, no charisma, just changes at the wrong time again. Just had enough.
We've got the players, but we're just not doing it to play as a team.
This has been another performance raising questions about whether Gareth Southgate can get the best out of such a talented group of players. But they should have done enough already to get through to the last 16. Now it's about whether they'll still be able to go through as group winners. Point shared and hug shared.
I'm so sorry, man.
Yeah? Well done.
Yeah, it's not coming home.
Are you happy? Are you happy with your result?
Yeah, see me.
Yeah?
See me. Are you?
I'm not happy with our result. We should do better.
Yeah, you should definitely.
Champions of Europe, you'll never sing that.
They know what it's like to win this tournament. Will the Three Lions ever?
Well, let's bring in Rob. And Rob, as you say, I mean, high expectations from the England team and a lot of disappointment this evening, but all eyes now on next Tuesday when they'll play Slovenia.
Yeah, and the format does mean that they should be sure now of going into the last 16. It's just that many of the fans are expecting something a bit more out of an England team with Jude Bellingham, who's just won the Champions League and the Spanish League with Real Madrid. You've got Phil Foden, who's the Premier League Player of the Year, and of course Harry Kane, who's currently starring here in and was Europe's top scorer throughout all of last season. And here currently in Frankfurt's main Old Town, you've got a lot of England fans gathered into the night. It's been pretty good-natured, and because it was an earlier kick-off, they've all been able to sort of gather in here to sort of soak up the local atmosphere, and they're the ones who really expect something a bit more from England, having seen them fall short in big games over the years, and they're still hoping they can go that one better than last time at the Euros to actually win the competition and emulate what the women's team managed to do 2 years ago.
Yeah, and Rob, there's been a bit of a development from the Serbian national team.
Yes, Serbia's federation today has called on UEFA to take action against the Albanian-Croatian FAs over what they see as racist and discriminatory chants in a match in Hamburg here at the Euros. It even led to a sort of vague threat by Serbia to walk out of this competition, but that would seem unlikely given the financial cost of doing so. But we have had this evening an announcement from UEFA saying that their ethics and disciplinary inspector has opened a case into the Albanian and Croatian FAs into looking into potential racist or discriminatory conduct by supporters within the game. Also, an investigation open into an Albania player into his alleged inappropriate conduct with some of his chants after the game. What we are seeing is how the fallout really from the Balkans War of the 1990s manifest themselves on the football arena still here many years later, with all the disputes in the region being evident in football fans' chants within stadiums. That creates a real volatile atmosphere at times to show us how you can't escape the geopolitical tensions, even here at a football tournament that the organisers hope will bring Europe together. Serbia themselves have faced action. We've seen a flag displayed by their fans which incorporates Kosovo, and they themselves have faced a potential investigation into racist conduct by their supporters as well. So just many issues beyond the action on the pitch here at the European Championship in Germany.
Yeah, indeed, very much so, Rob. Thanks so much. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim, still to come. More than 1,000 people have died during this year's Hajj pilgrimage as temperatures soar in Saudi Arabia.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky's West of England correspondent.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. We help you to understand the world with us.
I'm Adam Parsons, I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back to the programme. 1,081 people are now known to have died in sweltering heat during the annual Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. Temperatures surpassed 51 degrees Celsius in Saudi Arabia. 10 different countries have reported the deaths of their citizens, including 658 Egyptians. Saudi authorities have implemented additional measures, including water stations and air-conditioned areas for visitors. But many of those affected by the heat were unregistered pilgrims, which means they did not necessarily have access to those facilities. Well, I'm joined now by Zara Mohammed, Secretary-General of the Muslim Council of Britain. Thank you very much, Zara, for joining us here on the programme. This is a very upsetting situation. These are incredibly high numbers.
Yes, it's really, really tragic because Hajj is a sacred journey for Muslims. It's once in a lifetime, and it's not uncommon that people do pass away. But over 1,000 deaths is really quite disturbing, and I think has really shocked Muslims and communities globally. How this has happened, of course, the soaring temperatures, but yeah, it's certainly been really, really tragic news to hear.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about these deaths over the years, because often we hear about it being a stampede or something that's caused several hundred deaths. But this is a result of temperatures reaching almost 52 degrees.
Yes, I mean, I think over the course of years, Saudi authorities have done a lot in terms of changing Hajj, upgrading the facilities, the numbers, and making sure that things are put in place to avoid things like stampedes. But I think we're seeing the effects of climate change, and we're seeing, over 51-degree temperatures. For maybe viewers are unfamiliar, the Hajj is a journey that we undertake outside. It is in the physical heat. It's in the desert, in the city of Makkah. And people will be sleeping in tents and kind of really following a journey of a prophetic journey and carrying out spiritual rites. So they are really exposed. But I think, as you alluded to, reports are suggesting many of them were without permits, without the facilities and the air conditioning that are really needed. But also some did actually suffer just from the heat. So yeah, it's really quite troubling, and I guess offers a lot of reflection around what went down and what can be done to ensure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it is one of the pilgrims of Islam, and you know, most Muslims feel the need to do this. A lot of them elderly as well. So that you know, we don't know the reasons in terms of who exactly these people are. The Egyptians have said their numbers. Many others we don't necessarily know because they were unregistered. I mean, you say the Saudis have done a fair bit over the years, but are they trying to figure out, you know, how to deal with those who are unregistered and don't have access to these facilities?
So I think what we've heard from the reports is that there was a good demographic of people that were turned away because the system does mean that you need to have identification, you need to be documented. And of course, not everybody gets to do the Hajj journey. We're very privileged as Muslims in the West, you know, we've got a lot of access and financial capital. It is quite an expensive journey to undertake. But people, particularly Muslim countries, will be on waiting lists. You know, they'll have to go through a process to get it. And for many, this is a journey of a lifetime. They may walk there and try by all means to get in, to conduct the spiritual and uplifting journey. So I think certainly from what we're hearing, they are looking into it. And I think they had done their best to try and those who weren't, you know, documented with permits, you know, to deal with that. But I think it's still, as you said, some who did have permits, particularly some of the Egyptians have said actually that was through heat stroke. So it will be really interesting to find out more about how it happened, where it happened. It's not uncommon that people do pass away. Obviously, it's very hot, and many people go towards the end of life when they are more elderly, or some people go with health conditions. So it's not uncommon, but I think in this case, over 1,000 deaths is quite significant, and something that I guess a lot of us are really wondering what happened.
Yeah, and Zara, we don't have a lot of time, but just give us a sense. I mean, there are thousands of people who go to make this pilgrimage each year, and each country is given a quota, aren't they?
That's right. Yeah, so every country, particularly Muslim majority countries, will have a set number that can go, because 1.9 million went, but we know the Muslim global population is in the billions. So really the idea that you can get a place may be that you're waiting your whole entire life for that. For those Muslims that live in the West, we actually have a lot more accessibility to it. But yeah, people can be waiting a very long time, and that's why the opportunity to go really means so much. And whilst these deaths are really tragic, I don't think it will deter many from wanting to undertake what is essentially a pillar of faith and such an important journey to carry out as a Muslim.
Zara Mohammed, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, more on the search for British teenager Jay Slater, who was last seen on Sunday on the island of Tenerife. Welcome back. Let's turn to the search for British teenager Jay Slater, who's been missing in Tenerife since Monday. Spanish rescue teams have today been searching areas around a ravine in the island's national park. Sky's Shingi Marurike is on the island and sent this report.
This is the last known sighting of Jay Slater, the teenager meant to be in Tenerife making memories on his first holiday abroad with friends, but missing for 4 days. The search to find him has brought rescue teams here, the remote village of Masca, and the holiday house where Jay had stayed with people he met on the night out on Sunday. He was last heard from on Monday morning as he began his journey home. Jay's mum, Debbie, has flown out to join the Civil Guard and mountain rescue teams in the search. She says she's living in a nightmare. Jay had been at the NRG festival in South Tenerife, which ended on Sunday night. He'd been staying at an apartment complex in Los Cristianos. But after the festival, he went to a different apartment in the Masca area, where he stayed on Sunday night. His last live location showed rural Diteno Park, a mountainous area, popular with hikers. One of his friends, the last person believed to have spoken to him, says he called her on Monday morning to say he was lost, in need of water, and only had 1% phone battery. He told her he was walking back to his apartment after missing the bus, what would have been an 11-hour walk.
The Guardia Civil have now described it as full mobilization. They're using every resource they have available to them. So that's troops on the ground, mountain rescue personnel, sniffer dogs. The fire brigade have now joined as well, who will be abseiling down into some of the valleys and ravines to see if Jay tripped, fell, or collapsed due to dehydration.
The route Jay is thought to have travelled is dry, arid, and rugged. There's currently a drought warning on the island, and temperatures can hit up to 30 degrees. Jay was meant to be staying with friends near here. Those friends and his family have joined a search operation that has only grown as the days have gone on. That search now includes dogs, drones, and helicopters, continuing to comb the mountainous route Jay may have taken. In Jay's home of Oswaldtwistle, members of his community came together for a church service to light a candle, leave messages, and pray for his safe return. His family now desperate for answers, but still holding out hope that Jay is found safe and soon.
Well, let's go straight to Shingi now, who joins me live from Tenerife. And Shingi, as you say, a desperate situation for his family and friends. Has there been any kind of update today?
Good evening, Yalda. Well, at the end of the 4th day searching for Jay, there has been no real update and no success. He went missing in the early hours of Monday, as you heard in that report there, and a key part of that timeline that the authorities will be examining is that conversation between himself and his friend who he was here with, Lucy Law. In that conversation, he told her that he didn't have water, that his phone battery was running out, that he had pricked his leg on a cactus, and he was trying to walk back to near where we are now. That walk would have taken 11 hours. Then after that, a search operation was triggered in the early hours of Tuesday, and that search operation today has reached what the authorities have called full mobilization. That means they're pulling in as much resource as they can, as you saw in those pictures in my report there. That includes a mountain rescue, firefighters, it involves drones and dogs. And in addition to that, we know that members of his family, including his mum, Debbie, who called this a living nightmare, are out here. There's also a social media effort to go along with the effort on the ground. A Facebook group trying to find Jay has now got more than 400,000 members who are posting updates, posting pictures of what he was wearing and trying to chip in on this effort as another dimension to this incident, another dimension to this story. And I have to tell you, even though we're near Los Cristianos where he was staying and there's lots of tourists milling around here on the strip, as I said, this part of Tenerife is not like the part of northern Tenerife where he was last spotted. That part of Tenerife is incredibly arid, it's rugged, it's mountainous, it's the kind of place that seasoned hikers would struggle in temperatures that could reach up to 30 degrees. Those are difficult conditions for anyone to go missing, and of course difficult conditions for a search and rescue operation, which tomorrow will continue into its 5th day.
Shingi, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, the standoff in the South China Sea. But how close are we to seeing a full-scale conflict between the Philippines and China?
Coming up on Sky News at 10, live reaction from York to tonight's TV Leaders event, including what was said about the latest allegations of gambling on the election date by Conservative insiders. That plus the press preview with what the papers make of England's shaky performance at the Euros. Join me at 10.
It's a very complex and mysterious condition. Quite often it's very difficult to diagnose. People get wrongly diagnosed. It's similar to certain other conditions. So it's great that they're making some progress. I doubt that it'll be very soon before lots of people are offered this test, because just think about it. Who would want suddenly to decide to find out whether they were likely to get Parkinson's or not? But I think it will be part of this whole effort to understand what's going on in the brain, what is causing those dopamine cells to die, and whether anything could be done about it. We are seeing a couple of very promising new drugs at the moment, but as you heard there, they're obviously being tested on people who have already got the condition. If you could test it on people who didn't have but were susceptible to the condition, that would be very interesting indeed. So I was on holiday with my wife and I kept dragging my leg. And then in the September, I was on the BBC holding a cable up in a report on broadband on Jersey. And somebody did write in saying they'd noticed a tremor there and I ought to get that seen, see a neurologist. And I had actually already made steps, but it kind of confirmed me my suspicions that what was revealed a few months later, that yes, I did have Parkinson's disease. And there it was diagnosed by basically a consultant stretching my arms this way and that, making me walk around the office, doing various exercises, getting in and out of a chair, almost kind of a pretty crude test. And later that was confirmed by a scan, what's called a DAT scan. But so if a blood test, when you were showing symptoms, could make that process simpler, that too would be helpful. I'm 5 years in. The first three or 4 years seemed relatively good. I had a bad fall last year, which I don't think was to do with Parkinson's, but it took me down a step. So I'm now finding it a bit harder to walk. I've got more mobility problems, and there's other factors as well. I sleep terribly, and there are various things that are sort of what are called non-motor symptoms. But I'm on medication. I've got friends with whom I make this podcast. We get quite a lot of laughs out of it, as well as the odd moan. So I can't complain, really.
Welcome back. The Philippines has accused China's Coast Guard of acting like a band of barbarians after tensions flared once again in the South China Sea. A Filipino sailor reportedly suffered a serious injury after being rammed by a Chinese vessel. In response, China says it always upholds the international rule of law at sea. It's accused the Philippines of making provocations and violating China's sovereignty. Well, China declares sovereignty over almost the entire South China Sea. It's a different boundary compared to the Chinese maritime border, as defined by the UN. And this is the Philippines maritime border. The intersections mean there's been a number of tense standoffs in recent years. And that's exactly what we've seen this week. Footage of the confrontation released by the Philippines military shows the Coast Guard brandishing what appears to be bladed weapons. Our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch, spoke to the Philippines Secretary of National Defense about the heightened tensions with China.
Tensions between China and the Philippines appear to be at an all-time high. What is your red line?
It is our obligation as a government to ensure that the Filipino people have the ultimate use or be the ultimate beneficiaries of the exclusive economic zone. It's hard to define red lines. I wouldn't want to go into hypothetical red lines, given that it is a very volatile and dynamic situation.
How concerned are you about all-out conflict with China?
Oh, that is really a big concern, not only of us, but the whole world. However, we are not a provocateur here. We have been the recipient of persistent bullying, not only externally, but we see evidence of internal subversion by China and the attempt perhaps to weaken our economy and our moral fabric. However, the risk of any sort of armed conflict to any Filipino is really worrisome. And Filipinos, a peace-loving people, will always try to avoid it. However, in the face of illegal acts by China, it will be a violation of our basic law, our constitution, for government officials to ignore this fact.
Can we expect to see more of the kind of confrontations that we witnessed on board the Filipino vessel?
Hopefully not. We do not want these confrontations, and we try to, of course, re-strategize things in order to avoid these head-on conflicts. However, how can you stop Filipino fishermen from fishing in their traditional fishing grounds? And insofar as they are harassed, then these conflicts will continue, because these are Filipino fishermen within the EEZ and within traditional fishing grounds insofar as Scarborough Shoal is concerned. And China tries to unilaterally occupy these areas illegally at that. And I wish the whole world were more vociferous in voicing their concern and their opposition to what China is illegally doing.
The Philippines recently accused China of building an artificial island. Are they winning this tussle?
They intend to make the South China Sea their internal waterway so that they can strangle international commerce and bring the South China Sea under their exclusive control.
That was my colleague Cordelia Lynch speaking to the Philippines Secretary of National Defence. Well, that's all for tonight's The World with me, Yalda Hakim. The news at 10 is next with reaction after Rishi Sunak said he was incredibly angry over allegations that Tory candidates placed bets on the election date. So tune in to the news at 10 for all of those updates. Good night from us.